I've been using Ableton for about 5 years now, and today I'm going to show you my top 11 favorite things that will absolutely change your life in the DAW. Let's get started. The first tip is high quality Ableton stock plugins. If you click on Delay, Redux, Pedal, or Corpus, you're able to see this pop-up that says high quality. If you just select that, it will turn it on for all of these 3 plugins. Also, Corpus has an option right here where we've got Eco, Low, Medium, and High. Just select that to High and you will have a high quality Corpus effect. Similarly, if you pull up a glue compressor and an EQ8, you can click these and turn on oversampling mode. I already have these things turned on for both my glue compressor and EQ8, but oversampling effectively helps reduce anti-aliasing in the music production process. Again, here, this will lead to higher quality audio and better sound. The only trade-off here with all of these plugins is higher quality audio will eat into your CPU a bit more. Next is a smaller feature, but I really like to stay clean and organized during my music production process. So if you create a new audio or a new MIDI track here and say you move it to a different folder, they seem to be different colors. Same thing if I move this MIDI and audio track over here, or if I want to change it for whatever reason to a different color and I pull up a MIDI clip, it will be the color I had selected. But if I take this MIDI clip and I say, I draw in some MIDI notes here, and I move this over to another Ableton track, MIDI track, and I want all of these clips to be the same color as my MIDI track lane, you can right click and hit assign track color to clips, and this will keep you staying clean and organized in your MIDI tracks. You can do effectively the same thing with groups of tracks. So if I create a bunch of tracks down here, I have some audio I want to pull in, move these into my basses group, and now I have a bunch of different colored tracks. You can just right click the group of the tracks that you want to change, and you can hit assign track color to group tracks and clips, and this will do this color application for every single item in that group. As you can see, everything just changed to purple. Color coding in Ableton makes things easier on the eyes and then also makes things easier to compartmentalize. If you've ever want to change the zoom on your UI, you can go to Ableton's preferences, click on settings, and go to this zoom knob. If we go to 100%, this is the default setting. And a quick bonus tip, if you're ever dealing with a slider in Ableton and it's going a bit too fast, just hold shift and it'll help slow it down so you can get a more fine-tuned detail to what you're using. But back to zoom, I'm working with a larger display, so I like to set my zoom to around 115%, but if you're having a hard time seeing things, this goes all the way up to 200% or as low as 50%. Next up, Ableton Sample Replace. If you're ever working with drums in audio, you might come across this problem to where you have a kick drum throughout the entire chorus or drop of your song, and if you want to replace it with another kick, it seems like you'd have to go through and replace them all manually. This is what I would do previously, and it's extremely cumbersome and slow, especially when you're in a larger project like this and you might need to replace 10, 20, 30, or 40 different samples. If you go into the clip of your sample and you right click manage sample file, this will show you the reference to where all of your kicks are coming from. You can quickly replace every single one of your samples by just taking a new audio track or a new audio sample and replacing over the sample you were just using. So now we are using this new kick sample. And if we want to put it back, I can just do Control Z. As you can see, it was replaced, but the name stayed the same. So let's just change this to, I don't know, kick. Right click, manage sample file. Say I want to use this acoustic kick now, and I can easily replace all of the items with that acoustic kick. A big call out here when working with audio drum samples, generally Ableton will have this setting turned on called Create Fades on Clip Edges. This is one of Ableton's awesome features, but when you're using drum samples, it tends to cut off the very beginning of the transient. So if your sample starts very, very soon into the clip, the transients of your drums will be a lot quieter. I had been doing this for years without even realizing that I was completely destroying the transients of my drums. So if you're gonna work with drum samples in audio, make sure to turn that setting off, or another solution is to just go in manually to where Ableton cuts, as you can see here, cuts off the transient and just move it to the side, so your kick's transient or your snare's transient is actually as loud as you want it to be, and you'd have to go in here and manually copy these over. So what's a good solution for this instead? That's where the power of the drum rack really comes in. So in this project, as you can see, I'm using a drum rack. Let me just turn off this old previous sample. And my drum rack has a bunch of different kicks and drum percussions in it. I hop into the MIDI track, and then I'm able to very easily just go through all of the different items that are in my drum rack. This will allow you to easily replace all of the samples, just like I just showed you, especially with drums, in a much easier manner, while also maintaining the integrity of the transients. This is an exceptional solution to the problem I was just showcasing. Using drum racks also allows you to keep the clip fade edges on setting. The entire purpose of that setting is to make sure there are no pops in audio and everything is sounding clean and awesome. But when that same setting is applied to any audio with a lot of transients, it will inherently nerf the loudness of them. So use Ableton audio racks to quickly change samples around. You can also use that same trick I just showed you for samples in general. So say you have a lot of different similar samples that are doing one thing, maybe it's an FX or a riser, you can quickly swap those out using the exact same trick that I had just showed you. So you go here, go back to the clip view, go to manage sample file. This is our riser up. So maybe we want to swap that for a different riser. Let's say this one. And as you can see here, it just swapped them all out. The next awesome tip is back within the drum racks we were just talking about. If we go here to transpose, for example, maybe we want to transpose our kick up 12 steps. And say I want to modify this same parameter in the other items in the drum rack. Previously, I would manually go in here and change each of these up to, for instance, 12 steps, which is a very cumbersome way to do it. Now I've discovered that there's a new setting to where you can go to copy value to siblings. So now these 12 steps will be applied to every single item within my drum rack. We can do the same thing here with volume. Sometimes I don't necessarily like that Ableton sets the default volume on your drum racks to -12. So let's just say set this to 0, hit copy value to siblings. And if we go into all these other items, they will be at 0 dB and then also 12 steps up. Next, save track as default. Default tracks are something that I use constantly in my Ableton projects. As you can see, when I hit Control T here and I create a new audio track, my audio is automatically set to -12. This helps me in the gain staging process, but the way you can do the exact same thing, let's turn this back to 0, for instance, right click, and we can go save as default audio track. Yes, one already exists. Hit yes, and every time I create a new audio track now, it will be set at 0 dB. Let me change this back to -12, hit save as default audio track, hit Control T, and I have a new audio track that was at -12, which is what I just set it at. You can do the same thing for MIDI tracks here as well. If I create a new MIDI track and, for instance, want to do something similar to what I did with my audio tracks, I can just turn this down to -12. I can right click, save as default MIDI track. Yes, I would like to overwrite that. Control Shift T. And that new MIDI track comes with the utility that I had just placed on there. The next tip is one of the most underutilized features in Ableton, in my opinion. You hit Control K and you can pull up the key mapping, which will allow you to map any parameter or toggle to a key on your keyboard. one of the instances I use this a lot is to solo tracks. So imagine you have the track you're working on, and then you also have a reference track. I like to click on solo, press Q, and this will map the letter Q to that solo button. So let me get out of this by pressing Control K. And now every time I press Q, it will solo this track. You can see the power in this when you're working on something and you want to be able to quickly flip back and forth. So for example, if I want to be able to quickly flip back and forth between my reference track and the actual track that I'm working on, I can press Q, and this will solo one of my reference tracks, for instance. And I can listen to that. I can press Q, and then I'll go back to what's actually playing out of my Ableton, press Q again, and it just is very, very useful for flipping back and forth between things. This is just one of the examples of what key mapping can be used for. You can use it for many, 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 many different things. As you can see, when you press Control K, all of these different things are parameters of which you can map to a key in Ableton. Next up is something that I use all the time, and that is the B key when you're working in the piano roll and MIDI clips. There are quite a few different options for how you can get MIDI notes into a piano roll. You can either play them in, you can also double click and draw them in as well. I just hit Control D there to copy the note, and you can kind of copy these around. But it can be a bit tedious and cumbersome if you are working with a lot of notes and double clicking these all the time. Another option is while you're within your piano roll, you can hit the B key and you are able to just draw notes around, kind of as you see fit. This is a really awesome feature of Ableton and makes writing melodies a lot easier, especially when you're using a lot of notes. The next feature that I use almost all the time that I don't see people use almost ever is you can import full projects from one project of Ableton to another project of Ableton. The use case I usually see with this is I start something in one project and I realize that this idea can be a whole nother song in and of itself. So I open a new Ableton live set. I've opened a new Ableton live set, and let's go to the project that we were just working on, the YouTube demo here, and say I want to pull in the kick drum that I was using. So I pulled that in, and everything we just had is now there from the previous project. Say I want to pull in the references folder as well. Boom, got everything from references. Let's delete all these. You can also just pull in all of these subgroups, and I've essentially moved all of the items from one project to another, but it came through with everything. Yeah, it looks like we pretty much have everything from that previous project. I'm gonna hit Alt-U to collapse everything. But this is a great, very, very powerful tool, especially when you're working in collaborations and projects, to pull in entire groups of folders and subgroups so you can continue on in a new project. Next up is saving device presets. So for example, let me pull in a utility here. So as you can see, I have my utility, and say I have made a bunch of settings in here of which I really like and I want to keep. So if I hit this little save preset button, I am now saving this preset of the utility. This can be very useful for when you're working in more complex audio effects or instruments. Let's pull in another one here. Say we've got a vocoder and we want all of these very specific settings that we have perfectly dialed in for our project. We can hit save here, and we'll call this IYKO vocoder. And now in any new project, we can just come back and pull this in, and we now have access to all of these settings that we just made at our disposal. Last but not least is Ableton Templates. Ableton Templates are a really powerful way to get started and get going really, really quickly in Ableton. So for instance, this is the Ableton default set, which I believe will be loaded upon every single new instance of Ableton. Will have these 2 MIDI, 2 audios. There are some producers that really like to start from this blank clean slate. I've heard some artists say that using an Ableton template makes them write a lot of the same type of music. But on the other hand, a lot of really professional music producers use Ableton templates all the time. One of the really awesome things about Ableton templates is you can save many different Ableton templates. I have a house template for house music. I also have a dubstep template for dubstep music, which comes with just a certain set of preloaded drums and instruments. My main template is the one I use here called IYKO template, of which I've iterated on over the years. It's essentially just a kick, drum group, instrument group, and a vocal group, and then a references group as well. I like to keep things simple nowadays, and I don't bust things nearly as complex as I used to. But for instance, let me make some changes to this. Say I want to create a new group, and we'll call this like Phil's group. And say I want to save this template to Ableton. I can hit save live set as default set, which this will save your template you have created here as the default set that will load during Ableton's initial launch every single time. So we'll just call this default. For example, I've hit that now, and every single time I open a new live set in Ableton, the template I have just created will be the very first one that loads in here. So again, here's the Phil's groups we had just created. I'm going to change that back to my old one. You can also right click within the Finder view of Ableton, hit set default live set. And then when I go to new live set in Ableton, the one that I usually use will be right here, which again is the groups that I had just described. If you're interested in downloading the Ableton set and template that I use, I will leave a link in the video description to where you can check it out and download it for yourself. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. I make a lot of videos just like this every single week. And if you're interested in learning how to make money as a music producer, check out this video right here where I detail 5 different life-changing ways you can make money and earn a living from your music.